It's literally whitewashing the ancient Egyptians, taking when you make a mistake when you're typing something out and you make a mistake and you get some white out and you just white it out. That's what has been done to the history of black people, African people worldwide. It has been whited out, especially when it comes to Kemet, especially when it comes to Egypt. Why? Because Egyptologists as a group, not all of them, want Egypt desperately. They want it. They want it more than they want Greece or Rome. Why? Because everything that is Greek or Roman is ultimately, or let's not even just that, ancient Hebrew, for that matter, Assyrian, anything that you can name in that part of the world. But let's just stick with Greco-Roman, is ultimately comes from the Nile Valley. Name something, I will show you its Nile Valley antecedents. Math, science, philosophy, religion, mythology, symbolism, it all comes from ancient Egypt, and the Greeks knew it. The Greeks were very proud of themselves, you know. They were very chauvinistic, very proud of themselves, and they had a kind of a superiority complex about every other people except two people, the Egyptians and the Ethiopians.
Until 640, the first non-African people came to Egypt, otherwise called the Hyksos, in 1675 BC. The Africans there were already in the 13th dynasty period. They had built every pyramid you saw there before. They had done the S-turn in the Nile. They built every one of the major temples that had already been built, including the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The first European to come there did not arrive until the Greeks arrived with Alexander II, the son of Philip of Macedonia.
Look, I'm a college graduate. I never heard all this stuff before.
Because they didn't intend to teach you that. They can't tell you that you're inferior and teach you that you taught Europe. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. When you heard of Homer, the first European to have written anything, you couldn't miss that. They said that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that was not until 833 BC. The Africans had already, in 255,000 at the Tassili Mountain, they had the Sibyllian period, first, second, and third, the pre-dynastic period, all the way up. The Africans had produced men like this, Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and call him the god of medicine. The Greeks changed his name from Imhotep to Aesculapius. There he is. There he is.
Wait a minute.
Remember when we were younger, we would hear some interesting tidbit about someone black who had invented something or done something significant in history, and we would wonder aloud, wow, I wonder why they don't teach us that in school. Well, I would argue some decades later that we're in no better position now with regards to our mainstream educational system and what it teaches our young people and our not so young people about our history. You know, Carter G. Woodson, the author of the book, The Miseducation of the Negro, asserts that a man receives two educations, one that is given to him and the other that he gives to himself. Well, if we're about to take the long journey into looking into the historical contributions of people of African descent, where will we begin? I mean, what have we done? What have we contributed to world civilization in the areas of mathematics, science, architecture, astrology, astronomy, medicine? If we wanted to find out, where would we begin? Well, we can begin in the most ancient of days. We can begin with an African, a multi-genius of a man. His name, Imhotep.
Imhotep, the father of medicine and a black multi-genius. The achievements of the black people of ancient Egypt have shown us that black people built truly one of the greatest civilizations of ancient times. But do you know that a person generally regarded as the most talented individual in the history of the ancient world was a black man? He was an Egyptian named Imhotep. Imhotep was the son of an architect. He lived during the reign of King Zoser of Egypt in 2980 BC. He was an exceptionally brilliant man. He was versed in medicine, architecture, engineering, philosophy, poetry, religion, and astronomy. It is through his work and writings that the Western world first learned of the existence of objective and scientific medicine based on the repeated and careful observation of a patient. It is said also that Imhotep knew about the circulation of the blood. He discovered this at least 4,000 years before it was known in Europe. Imhotep diagnosed and treated more than 200 diseases. These included disorders of the eyes, bladder, abdomen, and skin. Imhotep's contribution to the development of medical knowledge in the ancient world was such that the Greeks worshipped him as the father of medicine and their god of healing. Much later, after the sacking of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, many laid claim to Imhotep's achievements. Today, Western civilization holds to the belief that the Greek Hippocrates was the father of medicine. Yet, the Hippocratic oath taken by every medical doctor in Western civilization pays homage to the god Apollo and the father of medicine, Asclepius, which incidentally was the Greek name for Imhotep. Apart from his work in medicine, Imhotep designed the first pyramid, which was built by the Egyptians. This pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Saqqara, was an outstanding example of this black genius's engineering and architectural skill. It was the first building in the world to be constructed solely from stone and was one of the tallest buildings in the ancient world.
Appendicitis, gout, and arthritis. He also performed surgery and practiced some dentistry. This is the world's oldest known surgical document, the Edwin C. Smith Papyrus. Edwin Smith was merely a purchaser of precious antiquities. He had no ownership in its genius. That belongs to the African Renaissance man, Imhotep. The Edwin C. Smith Papyrus is a medical book of 48 different surgical procedures written in exquisite detail, dealing with cranial sutures, the external surface of the brain, examination, diagnosis, and treatment of head injuries, fractures of the neck, collarbone, skull, nose, and arm, as well as tumors, cysts, sprains, and dislocations. Imhotep not only made an impression on his pharaoh Zoser and the elites of the Third Dynasty, he left a legacy that would last for more than 2,000 years after his death.
Development in Africa. And so we could go right here to Africa and Egypt and show you the mastaba. This is what the kings was in before Imhotep built the step pyramid. All he did was stack them. That's what he did. But this is the development thing. This is what you call a mastaba. And just like in the pyramid, they still had the route that led down here where they buried the king.
Imhotep set out to build the world's first stone structure. But before he could build up, he had to build down. He started by digging a vertical burial shaft 23 feet wide and 92 feet deep to house the pharaoh's sarcophagus. Next, Imhotep's laborers carved a second shaft through which the pharaoh's body would be lowered. Adjoining the burial chamber was a series of subterranean rooms meant to serve as the pharaoh's afterlife palace. About 1,000 feet to the south, a second tomb complex was hollowed out from the bedrock. Like many pharaohs before and after him, Djoser would have two tombs. Egypt's kings had been building lavish tombs for centuries. In Egypt, a new king is crowned. He is Djoser, the second ruler of Egypt's Old Kingdom period. Djoser would establish a reputation as a wise and pious ruler. Even 2,000 years after his death, he would remain the model Egypt's later pharaohs sought to emulate. The pyramid builders began their quest for architectural perfection at a place called Saqqara. It was there in the year 2667 BC that an enterprising young pharaoh named Djoser claimed the throne and commissioned the world's very first stone superstructure. His tomb project would solidify Egypt's standing as the world's most advanced civilization and propel his pioneering architect into the pantheon of the gods. To build his dream tomb out of stone, Djoser turned to his right-hand man, an architect of humble roots named Imhotep. Not only was Imhotep Djoser's chief architect, he was also treasurer, high priest, and vizier, a role roughly equivalent to prime minister. But it would be his groundbreaking work on Djoser's burial complex that would earn him immortal praise. Even the Romans, great engineers in their own right, would one day worship at his altar. Worship at his altar. But Imhotep's architectural revolution, which would culminate with the construction of the world's first pyramid, didn't begin with one sudden epiphany. At first, he simply set out to build Egypt's biggest and grandest mastaba.
Imhotep is the first grand master. He built the first stone structure. You ain't no damn mason if you ain't cutting no damn stone. First grand master. The very first one cutting stone. For 2,000 years before Solomon. Okay? Again, we see the first grand master of the craft of Ptah sitting on the square. This is all knowledge, family. He's right. He got to be right. He got to be mathematically correct and sound. It must be order in the universe. See, there's no order on this planet right now. We are the mothers and fathers of civilization. Okay? That's a column. That's a column. As you can see, it is on the oblong. This is the first Masonic lodge of ancient Kemet. Okay? Constructed by the Grand Visor, the Tajeti Imhotep.
$1,500 years before Christ, Africans everything is an echo and echo and echo. They haven't even begun to question the basics in this civilization. As Dr. Diop has shown, that a great deal of the Greek science, and we're not attacking the Greeks, because they had their own genius too, but the basis, all these things they claim, you see, Hippocrates, taking sections out of the work of earlier Egyptian writers without giving any credit to them at all. Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem was worked out long ago. Pythagoras spent 7 years, some people say 22 in Egypt, and he comes back with all this, even medical theories, and brings it all back to Greece and all the claim. All the great European scholars went to Africa. Thales of Miletus, Democritus, Pythagoras, Eudoxus. There's a whole list of them walking into Africa, picking up things from astronomy, geometry, medicine, etc., and going back home and claiming it to be theirs. Father of this and father of that, when they're the children. Point to the fact that the calendar we use today is derived from the Egyptian. They were the first people to invent the second of time, the second of art, the hour, the minute. Their astronomical observations over many years produced these ideas, these precise quantities and volumes and times and standards, which were later to dominate the world. The Babylonians did not have any proper calendar. The Egyptians had the 365 and a quarter days. 365 and a quarter days. That calendar was invented in Ethiopia since 4241 BC. And before I leave Egypt, as I say, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but other parts of Africa. But before I leave that, let me mention the discovery, the significant discovery, which Sheikh Anthony pointed to today, of Ta-Seti, the discovery of a monarchy in the Nile Valley preceding the Egyptian, at least 2 centuries before the first Egyptian dynasty. And at Ta-Seti, they found not only architectural forms to which Dr. Diop pointed to this morning, they found the falcon god Horus, they found the crown, the unmistakable, the uniquely shaped crown of the Egyptians. They found the palace facades that were later used by the Egyptians, and above all, they found the hieroglyphs, so that the world's first major writing system is not even Egyptian, it is Ethiopian, it is Sudanic. Conclusion. They had plotted the spiral structure of the Milky Way. They had seen the Jupiter and Saturn, the rings and the moons thereof. They had worked all of that out. But particularly seriously, it caused such astonishment, such consternation in astronomical circles that Kenneth Brecher of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he said, the Africans have no business knowing any of this. Why didn't we know about this? Because if you go among the Bushmen and the Kalahari, or the Wugabuga and the Lugabuga, you're not going to find mathematics. Antic. Look at mathematics in Europe. It was nothing. Do you know that when the number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's Hindu, the Arabs and Africans invaded Europe as Moors, and the Arabs brought from India the numbers Fibonacci, yes, brought it to Europe first in 1202, but the Europeans didn't accept it because the church said numbers are works of the devil. It's as late as the 17th century.
He said that he became more alert and more human being. He became more, you see, Malone became a more human being. Not just human being, you became a more yourself. You achieve your destiny when you go to Kemet school. You became a human being, more human. We are a human being already, but more human being. That means more wise. And when you go to Kemet school, when Plato himself compared what they do in Kemet school, I give Greek because it will be no debate. You see, it's our school in Greece, the way we are doing things is just for creatures like pigs. You see, like pigs. You see, and he said, myself, I'm ashamed. Myself as a Plato, I'm ashamed. We do things like that, is a shame. And also, not only for myself, for all Greek, the Greek world is a shame. What we can do, our education, when you compare with a Kemet, is not even for human beings, it's just for pigs, for animals.
And they were very clear about where their civilization came from, and there are about 10 surviving references in the Greek literature about the race and color of the ancient Egyptians, without exception, black, starting with Herodotus, 450 BC. He says the Colchians are people in the Black Sea, in what is now Russia, or the Caucasoid, or Azerbaijan. That's where Colchis was. Like the Egyptians and Ethiopians, were black-skinned and woolly-haired.
is that mythology? Why are these Hollywood films, untrue?
Like I said, don't get me started. We could spend the rest of the interview just talking on that subject. But anyway, the ancient Egyptians named for their own country. They had actually 2 or 3 names, but the principal name was Kemet. It means literally the black land, because Kem or Kam is the strongest word in their language for black or blackness. So Kemet means the black land. Now, what happened is that, okay, the Egyptologists, the 19th, 20th century say, well, that just refers to the black mud of Egypt that is on either side of the Nile after the flood, except for one thing. The ancient Egyptians called themselves Kemiyu, which means the black people. All right? So these are the people, and they got to understand, too, there's some other subtle, interesting aspects when you look at their language. Their word for south was Kenti, K-A, we kind of write it out, K-H-E-N-T-I, Kenti. It's also their word for first.
When you go and look at their medicine, I spoke in Atlanta to the Center for Disease Control. Africans had aspirin before us. They were using Salix capensis, which is salicylic acid, the main active ingredient in aspirin. They were using tetracycline 14 centuries ago in Nubia. They found the yellow-green flash of tetracycline in Nubian bones 14 centuries ago. They only started using that antibiotic in America in the 1950s. They pioneered in several operations. They pioneered in the cesarean operation. Dr. Finch has written a fine thing on the cesarean. At the time when that operation was experimental in Europe, people like Dr. Felkin went into Africa and observed the Banyoro surgeons performing the cesarean, and the mother was hale and hearty after 4 or 5 days. No woman survived the cesarean in Europe in the 1870s. None. No woman survived. And they observed the operation, the way they stitched, the way they opened the belly, the kind of instruments they used. They observed they were using one of the instruments, the cautery iron, with such fantastic skill. It was very minor tissue damage. It caused great ruptures in the European hospitals. They found that Africans were using both anesthetics and antiseptics in their operating theaters at that time, when in Europe, Lister only introduced antiseptics 2 years earlier than the witness of this operation, which the witness said must have been going on for quite a while, because the Africans were performing with routine skill what was then experimental surgery in Europe.
100 years.
Most anthropologists have been satisfied to go looking for vanishing little tribes, utterly irrelevant, the Wooga Booga and the Luga Booga. And they go and they spend 6 months a year and they study all they know about the Luga Boogas. All their little ritual and their dances and their kinship system, who is my mother's brother, sister, son, etc. Utterly irrelevant to any illuminating vision of African civilization. And they come and they extrapolate masses of things about it. And so we have thousands and thousands of books about Africa that tell us absolutely nothing about the quintessential African. You cannot imagine what a Holocaust hit Africa. You cannot imagine what it is to take about 100 million people, the youngest people, and rip them out of the heart and core of a continent, the disintegration of family networks, the tremendous things that fell on Africa, the disease in one area in Tanzania. There were 5 million head of cattle. Europeans came in, introduced rinderpest, not deliberately, but they introduced it nevertheless. Almost all the cattle disappeared. You cannot imagine in the Americas, millions of people vanished just because of the common cold which Europeans had introduced in America. You're not aware of the massive destruction of civilization, so that people could mock us now and say, are you talking about all the great things that you did? If you did all of these great things, why are you not great now? What has happened to you? Why are you so broken and shattered and fragmented and lost? Why do you feel so inferior? We feel inferior and fragmented because we have lost a sense of the wholeness of our history.
history. I'm coming back to you, Pamela. You've been particularly lucky blessed, let me say, because in the system, the school system, there have been no arrangements made for you to get some backbone, put some starch in your backbone for your future. Fortunately, I say you've been blessed by your mother and father and your environment, you know, which feeds you. But can you imagine, can you try to make up for me a story of what would happen to you if you didn't know who you were? If you looked in the mirror every morning and you saw this little brown face and everybody thought it was so ugly, what do you think would happen to you?
Well, you wouldn't think very much of yourself, and you think, you know, you were nothing and nobody cared for you or anything. You didn't have any history, no background. You couldn't go forward because you didn't really know what had happened to you before.